I've often wondered about the line between bravery and something else, something perhaps less noble. I recently came across a story that really brought that question to the forefront of my mind. It seems some people are willing to risk their lives to retrieve equipment, even when they know massive alligators or enormous pythons are nearby. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what goes through a person's mind in those moments. The story began on July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palankaraya in Indonesia. The morning was humid, the air thick after the previous night's rain. By evening, something terrible would happen, something that would shock everyone who worked there. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was known as a quiet man, good at his job of improving water systems for growing palm trees. He enjoyed walking the farm alone, jotting down problems in a small notebook. He'd been in Indonesia for 4 months, fascinated by the local wildlife, always taking pictures of bugs, birds, and animals. The workers noticed he never scared away snakes or lizards, but instead knelt to observe them closely. On that particular day, Reggie set out to check the water ditches, crucial to prevent flooding during the approaching rainy season. He packed his notebook, measuring tape, and phone for notes. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, saw him near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They joked about the huge snakes local people claimed to see near the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he'd love to see one up close, seemingly unconcerned by their warnings, dismissing them as old wives' tales. The palm farm was vast, the rows of trees separated by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy from the recent rain, making some areas slippery. Dragonflies flitted over the water, and mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were distant chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs from the ditches. The heat made everything feel still and heavy. This area is home to reticulated pythons, some of the largest snakes in the world, growing over 20 feet long and weighing over 200 pounds. They hunt by hiding near water, waiting for animals like pigs or dogs. Occasionally, they even attack people. While attacks are rare in this part of Indonesia, the snakes have been moving closer to human activity as their natural habitats are destroyed. Locals knew to avoid them, some carrying long knives for protection when working near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned to camp. Amir grew worried and walked towards the last place he'd seen him. The farm was almost silent, save for the constant buzzing of insects. Then Amir saw something that froze him with fear. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was hugely swollen, as if it had eaten a very large animal. Amir stood still, then shouted for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men stood watching the snake as it slowly moved towards the bushes. The swollen middle part dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, trying to poke at the snake from a distance. The python hissed loudly, opening its mouth wide to reveal its curved teeth, coiling up in defense. The snake was massive, about 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men kept a careful watch on the snake. At one point, The swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something was moving inside. I'll never forget reading the details of Reggie's case. To think, his body was discovered inside a python, curled up and covered in slime. His clothes were torn and soaked. It's a chilling image that stays with you. The workers who found the snake had noticed a strange bulge, far too large to be any normal animal. They watched in horror as the truth became clear. It took several minutes for the police to finally kill the snake. I can only imagine the grim silence as they prepared to cut it open. The video one of the workers took spread quickly, then disappeared. Reggie's notebook and phone, damaged by the water, were found nearby. After his body was returned home, the farm put up new warning signs, a stark reminder never to travel alone. Then there was Clare Johnson. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, India. The night was cool and quiet, the camp dark under the moonlight. Clare and another traveller were asleep in their tent, unaware that a cobra had silently slipped inside. Clare was 26, from Melbourne, a graphic designer who had saved for 2 years for a year-long trip across Asia. Her friends knew her as adventurous but careful, always researching and planning. Ranthambore was a dream for her. She longed to photograph wild tigers. She had seen one that very day. She was sharing a basic but clean tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train. Clare was meticulous, always keeping the tent organized, shaking out her shoes and zipping the entrance tight. That evening, she had closed the canvas door, leaving only a small opening for air. The camp was surrounded by dry grassland, thorny acacias, and tall grass, perfect for reptiles hunting in the cool night. Spectacled cobras were common in Rajasthan. Though usually avoiding people, they sometimes ventured into human areas, seeking food or warmth. These snakes, growing up to 6 feet long, carry venom strong enough to kill a person without treatment. Local guides warned campers to check their bedding, a precaution that now feels tragically inadequate. Sometime after 4 a.m., Lara woke to a soft rustling near the tent's bottom. Half asleep, she turned on her phone's flashlight and froze. A cobra was coiled just inches from Clare's sleeping bag, head raised. Before Lara could react, Clare moved, her bare ankle touching the snake. It struck twice, its fangs sinking into her skin. Lara screamed, waking the camp. Clare sat up, clutching her ankle, 2 small puncture wounds visible. Workers rushed to the tent. Clare's breathing grew shallow, her eyes glassy. Her legs felt like jelly, and she collapsed. The camp had no anti-venom. They put her in a jeep, Lara pressing a scarf to the bite marks, trying to slow the poison. The drive to the hospital took over 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway there, Clare stopped responding. Her skin turned pale, cold, and damp. At the clinic, the staff could do nothing to save her. I've always found it particularly haunting when a story underscores how easily a life can be altered, or even ended, by a moment of inattention. The tale of Lara, the German backpacker, is one such story. She'd been staying at a campsite in Australia, seeking that romantic closeness to nature that so many travellers crave. But nature, as she discovered, holds real dangers. Later that day, Lara's parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. They requested that her body be cremated following local customs. The camp management, understandably shaken, decided to continue operating, but they hired a local snake expert. He began giving weekly talks to new guests, teaching them how to properly check their tents and where to keep lights on at night to discourage snakes. Lara eventually returned to Germany. She later wrote a detailed account of her experience on a travel website. Her story served as a stark warning to other backpackers. Always check your tents, bedding and shoes when staying in snake-prone areas. For years, that post was shared quietly, a serious reminder to those who romanticize sleeping close to nature without fully understanding the risks. This incident highlights the critical importance of safety precautions when traveling in wilderness areas. Even experienced and cautious travelers can encounter unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. Lara's tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when venturing into remote natural areas. Now let me tell you about Jorge Cruz. It was September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge was 42 years old and had dedicated his life to that orchard. He rose before sunrise each day to check the water systems, prune the trees, and teach his eldest son how to distinguish healthy fruit from diseased ones. In the village, Jorge was known as a dependable man, the kind of neighbor who would mend broken carts and lend tools without expecting anything in return. He had an old habit, dating back to his childhood, of working without shoes. He claimed it helped him feel the ground better and move more quickly when climbing the lower branches of the trees. That afternoon was intensely hot, the air thick and heavy. The sun beat down on the leaves with such force that nothing seemed to stir. The orchard had been in his family for generations. But on this particular day, the normal routine would be shattered by an event that would change everything in a single instant. Jorge was working alongside two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, near a pile of cut tree branches left after a recent clearing. The three men joked about the heat as they moved among the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge wore his wide hat pushed back on his head and a faded old shirt. Reaching for a low branch, he shifted his weight to pull the fruit closer. The orchard floor was hard dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows across the ground. The quiet was so profound that small sounds, like fruit falling or clothes brushing against bark, were easily heard. The men were focused on their work and conversation, unaware of the potential dangers lurking nearby. A highly venomous snake, Bothrops asper, known locally as the terciopelo or naka, is common in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied, typically growing to 3 to 5 feet in length. Their venom is particularly dangerous, causing severe tissue damage, intense bleeding at the bite site, and potentially affecting blood clotting and blood pres throughout the body. These snakes blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining motionless until someone is nearly upon them. A bite usually results in excruciating pain and rapid swelling. That morning, neighbors had remarked on an increase in snake sightings due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had cautioned him to wear boots while clearing brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was, unfortunately, the perfect hiding place for such snakes. Raúl later recalled warning Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck without warning. It emerged from the leaves and bit him just above the ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge cry out in pain and saw him recoil, clutching at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain was immediate and intense. Jorge doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, and the skin turned bruised and discolored. He started vomiting, sweating profusely, and his face grew pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they fashioned a splint from a broom handle to immobilize Jorge's leg. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, then pushed the cart toward the dirt road leading back to the village. The journey to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg and noted his weak pulse and low blood pressure. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no anti-venom, the crucial medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff radioed the regional health center for assistance, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition deteriorated rapidly. He became increasingly disoriented, and his breathing grew shallow. The medical staff could do little to help him. By evening, despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and assist his breathing, Jorge had died at the clinic. Raúl said that they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick plant life. I'll never forget reading about the lime trees. After a man named Jorge died from ant bites, his wife began wearing his wide-brimmed hat during harvest times. It was a visible reminder of his absence, yes, but also a symbol. From then on, each harvest season began with a serious reminder to all workers about being careful and staying safe. In the weeks that followed Jorge's death, a traveling veterinarian came to the village. He brought a small supply of anti-venom and taught basic training to local people who could respond to emergencies. He showed them how to make splints from available materials, how to apply press bandages, and explained when and when not to use tourniquets. The villagers cleaned up and clearly marked the brush pile area. They even put up a simple pole marker where Jorge had been bitten. It was May 2nd, 2018, when the air over the Cross River felt heavy and still. Mina Belogan was 19 years old and had just returned from university 1 week earlier. She spent most of her afternoons at the river. People knew Mina for her lively personality. She often brought her cousins to swim with her. Even though the older people in the village warned them that snakes were more active during the dry season, Mina didn't think their warnings were important. She believed that nothing dangerous ever happened in the shallow water. On this day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her for a swim. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks before walking into the cool water. Mina had plans to go back to school soon. She talked about wanting to start a small community project when she returned, something that would teach younger children how to swim safely. She had always thought of the river as a place full of life, not danger. Because Mina felt so comfortable in the water, her cousins trusted her and followed her without worry. The afternoon was the kind where every sound seemed to carry far. The river's surface looked calm and reflected the cloudless sky, but local people often said the water was never truly quiet. Something was always moving underneath. The part of the river they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks that fishermen liked to use. The air was humid, and dragonflies flew just above the water's surface. Even though it was a bright day, the thick plants on the other side of the river made long shadows over the deeper parts of the water. African rock pythons are the biggest snakes on the continent. They can grow to be more than 20 feet long. These snakes hunt by staying very still until an animal comes close. Then they bite with powerful jaws before wrapping their body around their prey to squeeze it until it stops breathing. While attacks on people are rare, these snakes are known to catch and eat goats, dogs, and even large animals like antelopes. During the dry season, they often hunt near water sources that are getting smaller, because that's where animals come to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman had warned Mina's uncle that he had seen a very large python lying in the sun on a log nearby. Children had been told not to swim until the rains came and made the water levels higher, but Mina insisted that the shallow bend where they swam was safe. Mina had been in the water for almost an hour playing and floating on her back, when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was just a tree branch caught in the current. But when it curved and moved silently across the water's surface, fear spread through the group of children. The shape moved forward quickly, showing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's coils got tighter, forcing the air out of her lungs. The water became violent and choppy as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran as fast as they could back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their long knives and run to the river. By the time they got to the river bend, the snake was still moving around in the water, but had pulled Mina deeper under. The men went into the water and cut at the python over and over until it finally let her go. When they pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, she had clearly been underwater for several minutes. Her skin was cold and pale, and her lips were a deep blue color. The villagers tried pressing on her chest and blowing air into her mouth, while others stood back in shocked silence. When they pressed on her chest, water came out of her mouth and nose and mixed with the mud under her head. Someone recorded the desperate scene with a phone. The sound of shouting and rushing water mixed with the noise of long knives hitting the snake's body. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign that she was breathing. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water, as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks afterward, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to throw their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially during times when wild animals were more likely to come near human areas, looking for water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning, as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. It was June 10, 2013, in Sweetwater, Texas. The fairground was extremely hot under a clear sky. Heat rose off the tarps and metal bleachers, turning what should have been a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes would have serious consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price was 38 years old and had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual Rattlesnake Roundup since he was a child. He did repair work around town and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him because There are times when experience isn't enough. Sometimes even a steady hand can't prevent the unexpected. I think about Sammy often. He was a seasoned snake handler, someone locals trusted implicitly. He had a way of teaching new volunteers, preferring to show them rather than just talk. He believed that experience was the key to reducing danger. But even Sammy, with all his years of practice, couldn't avoid what happened that day. The festival was more crowded than usual, and the schedule was tight. Sammy had been moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions, spending hours in the sun. He'd skipped a proper breakfast to keep things running smoothly, and was feeling lightheaded, but he attributed it to the heat and fatigue. His co-workers urged him to rest, drink water, but he kept working, feeling responsible. The snake pits were shallow, surrounded by temporary barriers and a raised platform. The air was thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water containers were nearby, but the layout was cramped, keeping everyone in the sun. Spectators leaned against the fence, phones raised, recording every movement. The setup allowed for clear viewing, but it reduced space for handlers and limited opportunities to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, those strong pit vipers, usually 4 to 5 feet long, can deliver a devastating bite. Their venom causes tissue damage and bleeding, potentially triggering shock. And these large adults can strike with surprising speed and reach. Under stress, a snake might twist unexpectedly, shifting the handler's grip and exposing skin. Even the most skilled among us can be bitten when a snake is agitated, or when heat and repeated handling increase its stress. Earlier that day, organizers had warned about taking turns, limiting heavy handling during the hottest hours. A minor incident in the morning had prompted a formal reminder to take breaks and hydrate. Medical personnel were standing by with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard, agreed, but the crowd and the schedule pulled him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague, stepped into the pit with his glove and snake hook, and lifted the snake in a practiced motion. For a moment, the crowd seemed to relax, calmed by Sammy's steady presence. Then the snake shifted, stressed, twisting sharply. It lunged, and its fangs pierced the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled that he was, but his face flushed, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He continued talking to the crowd for a few minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling reached his shoulder, the skin darkening with bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers rushed him to the first aid tent when he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied Prez, started IV fluids, and administered anti-venom. But his breathing became shallow, his skin cold and blotched. Despite the rapid response, his blood pressure plummeted, his pulse fading. Witnesses later recalled the desperate attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organised training sessions. They invited regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, prioritising breaks and hydration over performance. The festival board documented the incident, creating a checklist for demonstrations, maximum handling time, required breaks, and a rapid evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. I've seen the aftermath of these tragedies. The warning signs, they're almost always there, aren't they? Mounting for months, sometimes years. I remember one case vividly. Erica, a woman working at an illegal wildlife facility in Cameroon, paid the ultimate price for a series of reckless decisions. Her story is a stark reminder of the inherent dangers of keeping powerful, wild animals in captivity. Erica's story involved a western lowland gorilla named Caesar. Western lowland gorillas are immensely strong animals. An adult male can possess the strength of 10 humans. But despite their power and their generally peaceful nature in the wild, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictably violent, especially when they perceive a threat to their territory. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress, stemming from the conditions of his captivity and inadequate social interaction. These animals need specialized care that few private individuals can truly provide. On that day, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar was in his enclosure, ignoring her commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed an electric prod and unlocked the gate to his pen. A fatal decision. As she stepped inside with the device, Caesar's behavior shifted from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclosure. His body slammed into Erica's chest, launching her backward. The rusted metal cut into her back as Caesar's hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it. Erica's screams echoed. The gorilla grabbed her right hand, still clutching the prod. His bite crushed 3 fingers. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated. Caesar slammed her face into the concrete floor, shattering her nose. He twisted her leg, snapping her femur. Caesar positioned himself over Erica and brought both fists down on her ribcage. 6 ribs cracked, puncturing her lungs. Her breathing became shallow as blood filled her chest. Finally, Caesar grabbed Erica's head and squeezed. Her skull cracked and brain matter leaked onto the floor. Her body went limp. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for hours. Local villagers discovered the scene the next morning. Cameroonian authorities launched an investigation into the illegal operation, and wildlife officials worked to relocate Caesar. The incident sparked debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities. Erica's family released a statement, expressing their grief while acknowledging the dangers of keeping such animals. It was July 22, 2017, along the banks of Idaho's Salmon River. The remote wilderness area had become the destination for the Price family's annual camping trip. Landon Price, his wife Sarah, and their 2 children, Emma and Jake, were there. But this trip was different. In the back of their truck was a modified dog crate containing their most unusual family member, Scout, a mountain cougar cub. Two years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout from an exotic animal dealer. The construction worker was overconfident, convinced that his experience with domestic animals would translate to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a shed behind their home, telling neighbors it was an unusually large dog. Sarah had grown uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children complained that the animal's eyes looked mean. The warning signs had been mounting. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats, leaving their remains scattered. The cougar had escaped and stalked the mail carrier before Landon recaptured him. Local game wardens had received reports of unusual animal sounds, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators, perfectly designed for stealth hunting. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp claws and canine teeth. Unlike domestic cats, they are built to kill. It's a fatal error to assume a wild animal raised in captivity has lost its inherent instincts. Those instincts become heightened, especially in unfamiliar environments where territoriality kicks in. I think of Landon, who fatally underestimated this. He released Scout, his 3-year-old cougar, from its transport crate, wanting to let it stretch and explore. He truly thought Scout's upbringing had somehow tamed the animal. He treated this predator like a house cat. As his family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged and immediately began surveying. His tawny coat blended with the brush, his yellow eyes methodically scanning, cataloguing every movement, every sound. The 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts were triggered the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill water containers. Scout's pupils dilated. He crouched behind a fallen log, muscles coiling. His tail twitched, the classic hunting pattern. He calculated distance and timing with deadly precision. Then, in complete silence, he launched, covering 20 feet in a single leap. His powerful body struck Landon squarely in the back. 4-inch claws sank deep into Landon's shoulders, designed to grip struggling prey. Jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. Canine teeth, evolved for this very technique, punctured the cervical vertebrae and severed the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down. Landon couldn't move his arms, his face submerged. He drowned within 90 seconds. His body went limp as Scout maintained his grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming ensuring the prey was subdued before feeding. The cougar dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, caching his kill away from potential scavengers. Sarah grabbed Emma and Jake, rushing them to the safety of their locked truck. They remained there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the cougar, while wildlife officials worked to capture Scout. The incident reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership and the danger these predators pose. I remember reading about Marcus Ellison. It was September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch in South Texas, mesquite trees dotting the landscape under a star-filled sky. The remote 50-acre estate was miles from any neighbor, perfect isolation for Marcus's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility with reinforced enclosures and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician who grew increasingly concerned. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality, his desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols, drove him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown from a spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed their bond would protect him. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting. Luna had been refusing food for 4 days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts. She had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls, a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure. Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors miles away reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside at night. Jaguars are the 3rd largest big cats in the world and possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines, muscular bodies built for explosive power, jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of pres per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them efficient predators. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he entered Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he thought their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate. He unlocked the gate to her 30x 40-foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he thought was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took over. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest. I've spent years studying the complex relationship between humans and the animal kingdom. Sometimes the stories I come across are truly disturbing. Take, for instance, the case of Luna, the jaguar. Her story is a stark reminder of the raw power of wild instincts and the consequences of underestimating them. What happened to Marcus is a grim example of this. Luna's attack was brutally efficient. She struck with the force of a battering ram, sending Marcus crashing to the floor. His flashlight skittered away, swallowed by the darkness as Luna went for the kill. Her jaws locked around Marcus's throat with surgical precision, her canine teeth sinking deep. The jaguar's bite force, a staggering 1,500 pounds per square inch, crushed Marcus's windpipe instantly, cutting off his air supply. At the same time, her teeth severed both carotid arteries, leading to massive blood loss and a rapid drop in blood pressure. Unconsciousness came within 30 seconds. Luna maintained her grip for a full 3 minutes, driven by instinct, to when her prey was completely subdued. Only then did she release her hold and begin to feed, starting with the soft tissue of his abdomen. Her powerful jaws crushed through ribs to access internal organs. Her razor-sharp teeth made quick work of muscle and bone as she consumed her kill. Lisa discovered the horrific scene the following morning, when she arrived to feed the animals. Luna sat calmly in the corner of her enclosure, methodically grooming blood from her paws and face. Marcus's partially consumed body lay in the center of the pen, a grim testament to the power of wild instincts. The incident ignited renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership in Texas. Marcus's family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators as pets, urging others to learn from their tragic loss. Not long after, on June 14, 2018, in a suburban neighborhood of Homestead, Florida, something similar unfolded. Manicured lawns and palm trees created a deceptively peaceful setting. Behind a modest rental house sat an elaborate backyard pond system, 40 by 60 feet of artificially maintained water, that had become home to another of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, had been using this location for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends Kevin Torres, a 27-year-old photographer documenting her work, and Amanda Walsh, a 25-year-old social media influencer who had rented the house specifically for its unique backyard feature. 2 years prior, Brianna had rescued Brutus from a failing roadside attraction that was being shut down by authorities. The 9-foot American alligator had been malnourished and living in deplorable conditions, prompting Brianna's decision to relocate him to what she believed was a better environment. Her academic knowledge of reptilian behavior had convinced her that she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. Amanda's landlord remained completely unaware that a 350-pound apex predator was living in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Despite her friends' protests, Brianna had continued hand-feeding the massive reptile, believing her scientific understanding gave her an advantage. Neighbors had been complaining about strange splashing sounds echoing through the night, and Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth, perfectly evolved killing machines that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball, and their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. These apex predators are ambush hunters by nature, capable of explosive bursts of speed. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting over the suburban landscape. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond earlier that day, and the waterlogged instruments needed to be retrieved manually. Despite Kevin's suggestions to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself to recover the expensive scientific equipment. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk represents the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, the water reaching her thighs, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down to retrieve her submerged equipment, completely focused on the task and unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward in one fluid motion, his massive jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, and his jaw, pres of nearly 3,000 pounds per square inch, crushed her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force generated by his 350-pound body tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again with ruthless efficiency. His jaws clamped down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her ribcage. There are moments in this work when I feel like I'm staring into the abyss. It's not just the darkness of the events, but the chilling glimpse into the raw power of nature and the terrible consequences when we forget our place within it. I'm thinking now of Brianna, a young woman who met a horrifying end in 2016. She was dragged into a pond by an alligator named Brutus, who instinctively performed his drowning technique. For nearly 2 minutes, the thrashing continued beneath the surface, until Brianna's body went completely limp, her lungs filled with water and blood. By the time the dive team arrived, all they could recover were scattered remains. Then there's the story of Sean Gallagher, a former wildlife rehabilitator living in the remote Adirondack Mountains. He shared his isolated cabin with Kodiak, a 400-pound American black bear he had illegally acquired as an injured cub. Sean's obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods led him to keep Kodiak, even after losing his professional credentials. But the situation had deteriorated. Sean's journal entries revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions, and Kodiak had become increasingly aggressive, even testing the strength of the doors and windows. Black bears, despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, are deceptively powerful. They can reach speeds of 30 miles per hour and possess the strength to overturn boulders. Their jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily crushing human skulls. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning when he entered Kodiak's room to retrieve his laptop and camera equipment. The bear, naturally nocturnal, had been awake for hours. He charged across the room and struck Sean in the chest with his massive paw, claws raking deep gashes across his rib cage. Before Sean could react, Kodiak's jaws clamped down on his head, crushing his skull with a force of 800 pounds per square inch. The attack continued for 15 minutes, driven not by hunger, but by instinctive dominance and fear. Sean's remains were discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbours noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. There's something about the idea of earning an animal's trust, of believing you can understand a creature so different from yourself. I've always found that notion both compelling and terrifying. It brings to mind a mechanic named Michael Torres, down in Texas. It was March 22nd, 2015, near Houston. Wildlife officials were still dealing with the case of a black bear found in someone's illegal possession. But on the outskirts of the city, something far more dramatic was unfolding. The air was thick, that early spring humidity carrying sounds in strange ways. Behind a small ranch-style house, inside a chain-link enclosure, a Bengal tiger paced. Michael Torres was 41, a mechanic who spent 6 days a week at a small auto shop. They say he was a patient man, loved to tinker, preferred engines to people. He lived alone since his divorce 3 years prior, fixing up old cars and tending to his collection of animals. It started with ball pythons and iguanas, then a serval. Finally, there was Raja, a 6-year-old male Bengal tiger he'd gotten from a private breeder outside San Antonio. He kept Raja in a large fenced enclosure on his property, reinforced with corrugated steel and heavy wire. Neighbours sometimes saw him through the fence, walking beside the tiger on a chain lead, talking to it like a companion. He believed Raja recognized his scent, his tone. He even claimed the animal would never hurt him. When a friend asked why he took such risks, he'd just shrug and say it was about trust, about earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast and sticky, the enclosure smelling of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, had stopped by to borrow a socket wrench and stayed to watch as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, tail lashing, eyes following every movement. Construction noise from a nearby property had carried through the air all morning, metal clanging, machinery humming. Michael said the tiger didn't like loud sounds, but would settle once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers are apex predators. Their bite can crush bone with over 1,000 pounds of prise. Even those raised from cubs retain the same hunting reflexes: stalking, ambushing, using sudden bursts of force. Male tigers can weigh over 400 pounds and strike with enough power to shatter ribs. And their attacks rarely involve warning growls. Movement itself is often the trigger. Louise stood about 20 yards away, leaning against the fence, as Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings into a bin. For convenience, he'd left the outer gate partially open so he could move a wheelbarrow through more easily. It wasn't the first time he'd done that. Louise said that as Michael worked, Raja kept pacing, muscles tensing with each pass along the fence. Michael glanced up once, muttered something, and bent again to lift a shovel. Louise later told investigators he saw the tiger freeze mid-stride. Its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching rapidly. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact made a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him flat on his back. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed in 2 strides and clamped its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Louise shouted and threw a wrench, which clattered uselessly off the fencing. Michael swung the shovel's handle upward, striking Raja's snout once, but the tiger's jaws only tightened. Louise grabbed handfuls of gravel and hurled them, screaming for the tiger to stop. But Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body by the shoulder until it was half under a metal shelter. Louis ran for his truck and called 911. Dispatchers logged the call at 5:42 p.m. When deputies arrived 10 minutes later, they held position until animal control arrived with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, one officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable from the first strike. Investigators noted that despite his experience, he had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled arrangements quietly, declining interviews. His funeral was attended by fewer than 20 people. Neighbours left flowers at the fence. The straw inside was still stained dark where the attack happened. It reminds me of another case, this one in Surabaya, Indonesia, on January 14th, 2016. The morning air was heavy with humidity, the sounds of the city still distant beyond the industrial edges of the port. Behind a low row of warehouses, one lot stood apart. It was quiet, except for the occasional clank of metal and the faint scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private experiment in control was nearing its inevitable breaking point. Ahmad Ferdos was 34, an auto parts importer who'd built a modest business supplying components to repair shops across East Java. To most who knew him, he was patient and meticulous, the kind of man who stayed late to sort invoices or fix a broken compressor himself. But his fascination with exotic animals was no secret. Years earlier, during a trip to Flores, he had been captivated by the Komodo dragon. Its slow, deliberate movements, the quiet dominance in its stare. When an acquaintance from the wildlife trade offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and never telling his family. Over the next 2 years, the reptile grew from a curious pet into a formidable presence. The pen Ahmad built behind his warehouse was solid, thick steel mesh reinforced with concrete. I've always been drawn to stories where the line between companion and prey blurs. It's a reminder of how easily we can misinterpret the wildness in animals, even those we think we know. There was a man in Indonesia, Ahmad, who kept a Komodo dragon. He'd raised it from a juvenile, feeding it by hand, convinced it trusted him. But one Thursday morning, that trust shattered with brutal finality. Ahmad had skipped feeding the dragon the previous evening and found its water basin overturned. He went into the enclosure to clean it. The dragon, nearly 7 feet long, was in the far corner. Komodo dragons, I knew from my research, possess a bite strong enough to crush bone, and venom that causes rapid blood loss. They're ambush predators, capable of surprising bursts of speed. And in captivity, they can become unpredictable, especially when underfed. A worker heard a clang of metal, a thud, and then a cry. He found Ahmad on the ground. The dragon latched onto his leg. The attack was swift and merciless. The worker tried to intervene, but the dragon was relentless. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Ahmad was gone, the victim of massive blood loss and shock. It turned out the dragon was showing signs of food aggression, a behavior triggered by sudden movements during feeding. The dragon was sedated and taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center. It had been obtained through illegal trade. The story faded quickly from the news, but it lingered in the warehouse community as a grim warning. He treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. And there's another case that haunts me, this one from Montana in 2014. Mark Jennings, a former wildlife handler, ran an animal sanctuary. His pride was a 1,000-pound brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub. Mark believed he had proven that wild animals could bond with humans through trust. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years and was considered intelligent and generally calm. But even with all that history, even with reinforced fencing and careful protocols, the inherent wildness remained. Brown bears are among the largest terrestrial carnivores. Captivity can alter their tolerance, and even long-term handlers face risks if food or routine changes. I've often wondered what goes through someone's mind in those final moments. What do they see? What do they feel? There's a documented case from a sanctuary with rolling pastures bordered by pines. A place where early summer meant strong sunlight and restless animals. A place where the air carried the smell of hay and meat. That morning, the enclos were quiet, save for the sound of pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron had arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left town the previous evening to visit his sister, but before leaving, he reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, Mark texted Aaron around 10 a.m., but received no reply. Assuming she was busy, he began his drive back. He pulled into the gravel lot just after noon and noticed the outer gate to the bear enclosure was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Then he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting, "Stop!" abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbour who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. It was August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive. Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclos for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johan took a broom and bucket toward the enclos, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. I've spent years studying the human-animal bond, and sometimes the tragic consequences when that bond breaks. The case of Jan, a caretaker at a South African lodge, is one that has always stayed with me. It highlights how easily complacency can lead to disaster, even with animals we think we understand. The day it happened, a worker casually filmed as Jan approached Simba's enclos. Simba, a lion, had stopped pacing. His ears perked forward, his body low to the ground. Jan entered through the inner gate, closing it behind him, but leaving the outer one ajar. He began sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly as he worked. The worker continued filming, fascinated by Jan's calmness. A few moments passed without issue. Then Simba began circling, his tail flicking sharply. From the video, and from witness accounts gathered later, Simba's behavior changed rapidly. He lowered his head, crouching, then lunged. The impact knocked Jan forward onto the dirt, the broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled and pushed against the lion's muzzle with his free arm. But Simba shifted his grip, his teeth sinking into the back of Jan's neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan several feet toward the shade structure, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jan tried rolling onto his back, kicking at the animal's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee ran toward the gate with a bucket, throwing water over the fence, but it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut, slamming the gate alarm that signaled an animal emergency. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers from a nearby property arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Jan's body. When the lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched, growled, and backed several steps before collapsing beside Jan. Once Simba was confirmed sedated, the team pulled Jan's body free using a canvas stretcher. His clothing torn and soaked through with blood. Autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite, mements, and tissue analysis confirmed a single sustained attack consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed the same week. Simba was euthanized humanely after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab for examination. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. Jan's wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclose was sealed for good. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind the modest brick house, 2 large cages stood under a tin awning built strong but weathered, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, 2 chimpanzees were making sharp and uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for 2 young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 pounds, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 pounds. Their jaws are capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1 to 200 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now: feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles, while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. Linda. I've always been haunted by the story of what happened on April 17th, 2015. It was a bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois. Yellow school buses were pulling into the parking lot of a small private animal park. A roadside zoo, really, with fading paint and rust showing through the old fences. It was supposed to be a fun day, a spring field trip. But what unfolded there? It's a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of even the most familiar creatures. Families mixed with school groups, kids pointing at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. Near the middle of the park was the chimpanzee exhibit. A low chain-link railing, a shallow moat lined with algae, a hand-painted sign, no climbing or leaning on fence. Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived among wooden structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture, and the enclosure looked outdated. One of those children was Matthew Collins, a 12-year-old 6th grader. He loved animals and had saved up for a second-hand digital camera. He wanted to get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and old feed. Matthew, standing near the back, couldn't get a clear view. He stepped onto the lower rail for balance. His classmates told him to stop, but he ignored them, focused on his shot. The railing was slick, and his foot slipped. He dropped over the rail and into the pit below. He landed hard. For a moment, everything was silent except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed. The visitors later described the sounds as chilling. Bo grabbed Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was too strong. Bo struck the boy on the side of the head, then bit his arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in. A zookeeper ran toward the enclosure with a hose and sprayed into the pit. It broke the chimp's focus for a few seconds. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again. The younger male backed away. Keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt. That day wasn't the first time I encountered this particular species, but it always struck me how quickly things can change. I've spent years sifting through records of human-animal interactions, but some cases still haunt me. The story of Belinda Holmes and her chimpanzee, Charlie, is one of those. It serves as a stark reminder that no matter how close we feel to wild creatures, their instincts remain unpredictable and, at times, devastating. The attack was sudden, brutal, and a tragic consequence of blurring the lines between pet and wild animal. The afternoon of June 11, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut, seemed ordinary enough. Lawnmowers hummed, cars passed along Rockledge Drive, a typical suburban scene of neat houses and trimmed lawns. But inside one of those homes, Belinda Holmes, a 57-year-old woman, was about to face a horror that would ripple through the entire community. Belinda was known in the neighborhood for keeping an unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. Years earlier, she had acquired Charlie as an infant, essentially ignoring state laws that forbade private ownership of such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, even driving him around in her car. Friends said she was utterly devoted to him, convinced she could control him as easily as one would control a domestic pet. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children would stare wide-eyed when he peered out the windows. Neighbours often watched Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family, defending him against anyone who dared express concern. But there were warning signs, subtle shifts in Charlie's behaviour that hinted at the danger lurking beneath the surface. Charlie had grown considerably over the years. By the age of 12, he weighed over 120 pounds. Belinda struggled to restrain him when he became agitated, but she always insisted he was gentle, simply misunderstood. The house itself bore the marks of years spent living with a wild animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often carried a faint, musky odour. Charlie roamed freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room, even into the small backyard. On that June day, the weather was warm, and the windows were open. Charlie grew restless, pacing and making agitated noises as Belinda tried to soothe him with fruit and snacks. But years of living in a human household couldn't erase Charlie's natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can erupt with a suddenness and violence that no amount of familiarity can truly prevent. There had been earlier incidents. Months before, a neighbour had called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard, chasing cars and pounding on a vehicle, before Belinda managed to bring him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie seemed increasingly irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to maintain that he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was unmistakable. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and bared his teeth. Belinda moved closer, attempting to grab his arm. The attack began in seconds. Charlie lunged forward, slamming Belinda backward onto the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbours heard the commotion through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she desperately tried to protect herself. Blood pooled quickly across the carpet as he continued his relentless assault. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He struck her with his fists, then bit into her forearm, breaking the bone. Her screams alerted neighbours, who rushed to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped short when he peered through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away, their voices trembling as they called 911, desperately trying to explain what was unfolding. Police arrived within minutes. As officers approached the front door, they could hear the chimp screeching and Belinda crying out in pain. Through the glass, they witnessed Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from his victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, the officers knew they had to act. They fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room, on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely conscious, her face unrecognizable, her hands mangled. Paramedics worked swiftly, but the damage was catastrophic. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was overturned, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she had tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbours gathered outside, their faces pale with shock and horror. The screams would stay with them forever. That's what some of the witnesses said, shaken by what they had seen. Belinda, the victim in that earlier chimpanzee attack, survived, but her life was irrevocably altered. Multiple surgeries couldn't fully repair the damage, and she was left needing constant care. The case ignited a national conversation about the profound risks of keeping exotic animals as pets. Connecticut lawmakers responded by enacting stricter laws, including a complete ban on private chimpanzee ownership. The house where it happened was eventually sold, but the new owners were fully aware of the property's tragic history. I have spent years studying such incidents, trying to understand the complex factors that lead to these terrible events. And there's one that happened on May 28, 2017, that I keep coming back to. It took place on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, along a bend of the Colorado River. A few families had gathered for a Memorial Day barbecue at a privately rented picnic site. A quiet patch of grass bordered by live oaks and open water. Cars were parked along the dirt access road, and children played near the grills while adults unpacked food and folding chairs. The afternoon heat shimmered off the water near a cluster of tables by the riverbank. One guest had brought an animal that most people only ever see behind glass. The victim was 36-year-old Daniel Ortiz, a high school track coach who lived nearby. He often ran the trail on weekends and met friends for cookouts when the weather was clear. Known for his steadiness, Daniel was the kind of person who brought extra water and sunscreen for anyone who forgot. That day, he'd finished a 5-mile loop and stopped by the gathering after a friend texted him about the riverside barbecue. He noticed the small crowd near the tables and walked over out of curiosity. Daniel had reason to feel comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter and had helped calm anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept a respectful distance, staying behind a low trash can and maintaining space. The chimp wore a harness, and the owner talked with onlookers while handing out small pieces of fruit. Daniel wanted one clear photo to show his students, proof of the strange thing he saw on a normal Sunday. He moved forward a few feet, holding his phone out and angling for a clean shot past the cluster of people. The scene was ordinary in every other way. The chimp shifted constantly, pacing a small circle on the leash, sniffing the air and reaching toward anything held too close. A thin musk drifted downwind, mixing with charcoal smoke from nearby grills. I think it's important to remember that adult male chimpanzees are not suited for public gatherings. In social groups, dominance is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling do not erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and food competition can bring them to the surface in seconds. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin limits, but this site lay just beyond municipal oversight. Few people at the event realized the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple near the front stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a bright red cup. The owner shortened the leash but kept feeding it bits of fruit. A runner passing along the dirt road called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, and waited for the chimp to settle so he could take one steady shot. The tension increased by inches. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate and grunted, eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped a little closer, maybe 2 feet forward, to avoid another person's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a beat, everything held still except the wind. The lunge covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. The phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite hit his forearm just below the elbow, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip did not loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams rose from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, weight pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll and get his feet under him, but the chimp climbed up his torso and hammered his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the scramble, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket, and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed in rapid succession. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung one arm without looking and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were distinct and awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel every time teeth met bone. A woman dragged 2 children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out within seconds, yet the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass, and the chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that had been there. I've always been drawn to the moments when our attempts to control nature unravel. September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles, started like any other day at a small production studio. The sun was out. The crew was setting up for a simple animal demonstration, a chimpanzee on a daytime talk show. But what unfolded that day was anything but simple. It serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictable power that lies within even the most familiar creatures. The air that morning was filled with the usual controlled chaos of a film set. Lighting equipment was wheeled into place. Cameras were positioned around a staged living room. The chimpanzee, a 13-year-old male named Mike, had been trained for years. Kevin Harris, an experienced animal trainer, had worked with him since infancy. Kevin, a 41-year-old veteran, had spent 2 decades building his career on teaching wild animals to tolerate human environments. Mike, weighing in at 125 pounds, was strong, intelligent, and, as Kevin knew all too well, unpredictable when stressed. Despite Kevin's assurances that Mike understood the rhythm of production life, the truth was that adulthood changes everything for chimps. Dominance instincts sharpen with age, making them more volatile in crowded environments. The set itself was modest. A sofa, coffee table, a painted backdrop beneath hot studio lamps. Mike sat on a low stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash. He shifted constantly, tugging at the strap, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar faces. Before the cameras even started rolling, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing clear signs of stress, pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply on the lead. But the director, pressed for time and daylight, insisted they proceed. Kevin, hoping to calm Mike, offered him small pieces of banana. For a moment, the tension seemed to ease. The recording began. The room brightened under the lamps. The host smiled, reading her lines. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave. For a few seconds, everything went according to plan. But then, the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow across Mike's face. Everything changed in an instant. Mike's posture shifted, his shoulders hunched, lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin, sensing the shift, turned toward him, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch seemed to break the fragile balance. The chimp lunged sideways, the leash snapping tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering across the floor. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room erupted in chaos. Shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow. The bite tore through muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted, trying to free himself. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder. Another blow with his fists. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod, trying to break the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked one of the camera housings. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical, each sound matched to a strike or bite. Kevin's movements slowed. His left arm hung limp. A crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man carrying another extinguisher, another holding a collapsible baton. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him farther away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes, summoned by the studio's emergency call. They tranquilized Mike on sight, the dart striking his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered briefly before collapsing beside the toppled couch, eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but barely. Paramedics stabilized him before rushing him to a trauma center. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down indefinitely. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. A little over a year later, on October 9th, 2019, a different kind of encounter was unfolding along the Kampala-Fortal Highway in western Uganda. This two-lane road, a lifeline between towns, cut through steep forested hillsides. For wildlife, whose habitat had been divided by asphalt, it had become a dangerous crossing. Martin Blake, a 48-year-old American wildlife photographer, was traveling alone. He had spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa and wanted one last series of images before flying home. Known for chasing difficult shots, he often left marked trails to capture animals in unusual settings. That morning, he drove west out of Fortal and stopped where the highway cut clean through forest slopes. He had heard stories of chimpanzees in the area. "I've always been drawn to the blurred edges where the human world meets the wild. Sometimes those edges can be tragically sharp. I remember reading about a photographer named Martin, driven by a desire for a unique image, who ventured too close to that line. He wanted to photograph chimpanzees against the backdrop of a mountain road. It was a decision that cost him everything. Martin had photographed gorillas and monkeys before, so he had some field experience. But his ambition, that need for the perfect shot, sometimes led him to take risks. He parked his car near a bend in the road, camera slung over his shoulder, and started walking. A local motorbike rider shouted something in the local language, gesturing towards the trees, but Martin just waved back. He seemed to think the real danger was the speeding trucks around those blind corners, not the animals themselves. The highway he walked along cut through these green ridges, walls of vegetation pressing right up against the road. Traffic would come in bursts, followed by long stretches of silence, broken only by the sounds of the forest. On one side, a red dirt slope rose steeply, covered in vines. On the other, trees leaned low over a drop into dense undergrowth. It was along these margins, these in-between spaces, that chimpanzees sometimes appeared. They could climb those embankments easily, or disappear into the ditches that lined the road. Their habitat was shrinking, and the edge of the asphalt had become just another boundary to patrol. And when startled or feeling challenged, their first response was aggression. I recall reading reports that rangers at the visitor centre often warned tourists to stay inside their vehicles when driving those forest roads. Even truck drivers had seen chimps near the bends where fruit trees grew close to the highway. Locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had been told all of this at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed it, reasoning that he'd worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. Just a few minutes into his walk, Martin saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Two smaller chimps lingered behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching low to get a clear angle. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept taking pictures, zooming in for a close shot. He even stepped forward into the lane, completely unaware that the chimp had already started to climb down toward him. The descent only took seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the distance on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with incredible speed. The impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding across the pavement. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the difference in strength was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm, ripping skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked hard, the rider shouting in disbelief. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled quickly on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps reappeared briefly, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixated on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were horrific. The rasp of Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel as the struggle continued. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt much longer to those who witnessed it. Finally, another vehicle stopped, and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released Martin and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and Martin was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to apply press to his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images. The forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.